I mean, if you're looking at where am I today, where do I want to be, and how do I get there? It's extremely oversimplified form. So what can be done to understand from where people are coming from and see whether that fits in with what is available for them to be working on? In the sense, I mean, I'm looking at goals. If my goals don't match the company's plans, then I need to have a rethink.
So welcome everyone, and I'd also like to welcome our guest for today's webinar, Mrs. Madhuri Menon. I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to introduce Mrs. Menon to all of you. So Mrs. Madhuri Menon has worked extensively in spaces of human-centered development through her background in human resources, training, mentoring, and coaching. She has also actively worked in the not-for-profit sector. She has her own NGO, and she's also the board of trustees of various NGOs that work in the areas of women and children, education, livelihoods, rural development, watershed management, and access to finance in rural India. So Mrs. Menon, we're so grateful to you for taking the time out today. Your journey, all that you have accomplished over the years is extremely inspiring for all of us in the coaching community. And we're so pleased that you could take the time out for us today.
Thank you.
Welcome, Avril. I think all of us know Avril. So no introductions needed there, but she is a hero herself, and she's going to get all of us started on the hero's journey today. So over to you now, Avril.
Thank you, Kiva. Kiva is one of those people, if you're in a bad mood, you just have to look at her face and you feel fine, because she's got this 1000-watt smile, and I think all of us can attest to that. So drop a yes in the comments if you agree with me. So, welcome everybody. Welcome from everybody all over the world. I won't be able to name each one of you in the interest of time, but very warm welcome. And as I like to say, Atma Namaste, which means I see your essence, I see your spirit, I see your soul. It's an ancient Indian greeting, and I wish to greet you from an ancient Indian greeting in India. And also, I want to welcome Mrs. Madhuri Menon. Now, I'm just going to say upfront that I've gone through a few profiles and resumes, and if I were to read out Mrs. Menon's profile, we would be here for the next 15 minutes just reading out the amount of things that she has done. So I'm going to cut through the chase, and I'm going to go straight to the questions, because if you want to know more about her, you can just Google her, and you can also use the word BALM, B-A-L-M, and you can find out more about her. Welcome, Mrs. Menon. It's such a pleasure to have you here. You're looking wonderful and radiant. And how are you feeling this evening?
Good, absolutely.
Thank you so much. So, Mrs. Menon, like I was saying, your profile is absolutely mind-boggling. And if I were really honest, it's quite intimidating. I'm speaking from me, from my personal, from me as Avril. Quite intimidating, because you have a stellar background in so many fields. You have master's degrees, you have diplomas, you have decades of experience with people in human resource. You've worked extensively in the petroleum industry as well as the tech space since 1976. So what can you tell us about the landscape of industry then and now, in your capacity as a very seasoned and a very successful professional?
At the outset, Avril, thank you very much, and Vanakkam to all the visitors and guests here. And Vanakkam is the same thing which Avril was mentioning. It's the word in Tamil, where I am right now, in Tamil Nadu. And a big thanks to Kiva and to you, Avril. I mean, you boosted me up so much. I think I'm filled with helium right now and floating about somewhere way up there. It's a pleasure to be here, and wish I could meet up or interact, but maybe that will come later.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, now to start off before we, it's what, 7. I was trying to keep track of time. So
Oh, it's okay. I will be your timekeeper, and Kiwa is in the background. She will be our timekeeper. So just free flow and just let's have a great conversation.
Okay. As you said, I started my career in 1976. And now when I look back, I mean, it's way before many of you were even born, even thought of, because it's 47 years. And this opportunity to talk about coaching and the hero's journey really set me thinking, had we have a relook at a lot of these, the landscape itself of what have I experienced, and the kind of transition, good, the bad, the ugly, and a lot in between. So when I joined the sector, the petroleum sector in 1976, it was a very patriarchal, very traditional, very more rule-bound kind of a place. Understandable, because it had just grown, it was coming up. There was a lot of objection to our joining. We were the first ever batch of management trainees, PNA as we were called, the personal and admin management trainees, and there were 10 of us. There were 9 guys, and I was the only girl. And they joined much earlier. So there was a lot of concern, worries, are we going to displace them? A whole host of them. And like all public sectors, it had its own systems and rules. But just as the management was keen to, as we were keen to make sure that this is a success, the management was also trying their best. So we had a lot of support. And with some work, things changed. It took its own sweet time, and for a lot of transitions to take place. I was there for about 10 years. The scene is definitely very different right now. After the economy opened up and there was lots more. Today, you walk into any office, you see a lot of color. You'd see a lot of women in leadership positions. You see, when you're on the road, small indicators, like a lot of women behind the wheel who are driving 4-wheelers, 2-wheelers. So there's been a tremendous amount of change. One of the CEOs I was talking to in some other connection was mentioning to me that at one point, the entire 50% of India's banking assets were with 3 banks, all 3 headed by women. And there were certain sectors which were acceptably feminine, teaching, banking, and of course the soft jobs. But it's so encouraging. One of our biggest companies, which has been a forerunner of a lot of change, the Tata Motors, they have some assembly plants where 2 of their really high-end models of SUVs, the larger luxury cars, are assembled entirely by women. The plant is manned by women, and right from assembly to test driving, the Harrier and the Safari. So it's worth having a look at examples like these. There were always forerunners in a lot of change, but it is the kind of change in the mental makeup, the biases, the kind of lenses through which there's a lot of distortion which takes place. Where that has held back a lot of women. When I say so, everything is not absolutely hunky-dory. There's still a lot of constraints, and people talk about the glass ceiling and they say that's cliched, but it exists. I think it's more than glass ceiling. In some places, it's concrete walls. I did bump into quite a few of those, so I know about it. But over the years, over the decades, it has definitely changed. And the picture is much, much rosier than it is earlier. For instance, today, because of this gender divide, if a woman takes a break, it's always difficult for her to come back to a second career. One of the big areas of where there's a lot of work which needs to be done. But yes, the picture is much better, and there are challenges. I think half the charm of life are the challenges that are there. So the scene is definitely better. And miles to go before we sleep.
Yes. Thank you for enlightening us on the fact that these two cars, which are in the SUV category, are completely assembled and manned by women. I don't know how many of us knew that, but at least I was ignorant. And it's really heartening to know that, because that's such a huge, I don't know what the right word would be, maybe affirmation. That's such a huge affirmation for women that they've arrived. And, I mean, we all know that there are bus conductors and truck drivers and auto drivers, and, women have really, really made great strides, not to mention women going to space with Richard Branson and the like, or should I say Sir Richard Branson, sorry. But I mean, having said that, in India, to hear about in the industry of automobiles, which is such a man-centered, man-driven, sector. I mean, it's kind of sitting quite well with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people on this call. So thank you for that. And like you said, there are miles to go before we sleep, as you said. But I think every step counts, right?
Yes. Oh yes.
Step counts. And you've been, like you said, you've been doing this for 40 plus years. So who better to understand the trajectory of how far we've come than a person like you. So thank you for answering that so beautifully. Mrs. Menon, what about the mental health space then and now? In your experience, what would you think has had the most impact on mental health in India particularly?
Let me turn that question 180 degrees. Instead of talking about mental health then and now,
Okay.
let's have a look at what it is now.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Just for to throw a few numbers, WHO's estimate, their statement says that 1 in 4 people everywhere in the world will at some point in time be affected by a mental health issue. Look at the numbers we're talking about, and this is worldwide.
Yeah.
In India, we have 160 million approximately persons with mental health issues. And out of these, only about 17% have access to care, which means 83% is a gap in treatment. This is today.
Yeah.
And for instance, studies have shown that depressive disorders are one of the biggest causes of disability in mental health. And women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with that than men. The causes for this are multifarious. It can be violence, it can be the system, it can be society, it can be patriarchy, it can be, violence is one of the biggest issues, and poverty, generational poverty. So there are a whole range of issues, a whole range of causes. Another startling fact is that homelessness, and this is not just a problem in India, but a problem worldwide. Homelessness and mental health are very closely interrelated. Causative, and whatever is the reason, I would say conservative. It's an estimate that there are about 1.8 million people who are homeless. And out of these, about 35% are believed to have some kind of a mental health issue, or severe mental health issue. So we're talking about 600,000 people out
Yeah.
there who don't have access to affordable, accessible, and appropriate care. It's not just, this would be in urban areas. So how does a person in a remote village in Maharashtra come into Bombay, Thane Mental Hospital for the treatment? How does somebody come in here into Chennai Mental Hospital for the treatment? So when we look at some of these statistics, if you take an illness like, let's say, one which at least name a lot of people are familiar with, schizophrenia, they say the risk of the homelessness and poverty, which is layered on to already health issues, increases the risk 8 times for schizophrenia. So if that is the kind of scenario, where does a person who's ill from a remote area go for treatment? You take the number of the finances available. Our entire budget is about 1.3% for health overall. Out of this, 0.08% is what is spent on mental health. And this is for 1.6 billion people. Yeah, you're on mute. So, but it is so. That's why I said, if you look at it today, and this is the condition, what kind of human resources do we have? We don't have finances. We have a very high incidence of illness. What kind of human resources do we have to cater to this? We have about 8,000 psychiatrists across the country. We have approximately 5,000 clinical psychologists. We have about 4,000 psychiatric social workers. I'm not even talking about the others. So the kind of scenario which is out there, there are very few civil services societies which look at the issue of mental health. So those few which are there, for instance, the Banyan with which I'm closely associated and whose history I'm very familiar with.
Yes.
How and why was it started? It started because Vandana, the founder, found this woman in extreme distress on the roads, tried admitting her, no choice. And then realized that there's simply no choice for somebody who is in that condition, who is homeless, who is on the streets, and there is no place to take them. I mean, how many times have we in the past, I have myself done it, walk past somebody who has an illness, who has a problem. Not because people are bad. It's not because people are indifferent. They don't know what to do. They don't know, if I rescue, what do I do? How do I rescue? Where do I send them?
Yeah.
So the Banyan is 29 years old. This is the 30th year of its founding. So one of the major areas that we've looked at is to try and build a kind of awareness, advocacy. We were asking what is affected the scenario and what has the maximum impact. Impact would come when bureaucracy also has begun to realize the situation. Some states are more advanced than others, and there are some states which are very progressive in their thinking, and who have realized that they don't have either the resources or they don't have the expertise for it. So there are private-public partnerships happening. There are systems being put in place. We've had the Mental Health Act of 2012, which was a big step forward. Again, thanks to support from the system. So until there is support from that massive infrastructure which is available, progress can't be made. But fortunately, there is support. There is increased awareness. There is increased, even in corporates, there is increased awareness of mental health. So the more people know about it, the more people talk about it, the more people are coming forward to discuss what are the issues, and the stigma attached to it.
Yeah.
You openly talk about, oh, I have a heart problem, oh, I have a blood pressure problem, or I have a diabetes, type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes. Who would ever say I have a problem with a mental health issue? Swept under the carpet. So it requires a lot more work in that area to be able to build the kind of visibility. And today, fortunately, more and more high-profile people are also coming forward and acknowledging it, which is a great help towards awareness building.
Absolutely.
Maybe hopefully reduction of stigma, but at least awareness building. People know where to go, what to do. There are helpline numbers. So there is, if that was the scene which I told you is the scene today, think of what it must have been like 30, 40 years ago if you're not thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would, it's just, like I said, it's not been done because people are awful. It's not because people are unsympathetic or they are not compassionate. Their own loved ones, but they are helpless. They don't know what to do, or they didn't know what to do, where to take them. So today, if that improves, some of the Banyan's programs on community reintegration, if we get time to talk about some of those, that helps a lot in showing the world, showing the community, when you're integrated in the community, that I can live as normal as you. So it's just because I've had an illness doesn't mean I'm written off for life.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is the belief. So yeah, if I start on this, then
so I think what's coming up for me is that there was lack of understanding also about mental illness in the past. And there still is a gap in the understanding of mental illness now. People have this misunderstanding between being mentally ill and between, things like, of course, which can escalate when you talk about schizophrenia or bipolar or stuff like that. I mean, it's escalated, right, to a certain extent, or there is some change in brain chemistry. As far as my limited knowledge goes, I'm not an expert by any stretch of imagination. But when we talk about mental health issues among youth, among people in corporate, among people, just like a person like me, we're talking about like this chronic fatigue. You'll be talking about, compulsive thoughts, anxiety, overthinking. And that, I think, is not the same as somebody who is severely depressed or who is bipolar or who has schizophrenia or maybe multiple personality disorder. So I think in days gone by, I think people used to, and people still do, they cannot make the differentiation. So I think there's a stigma and a shame attached to it. So what do you think about?
Yeah, what you were talking about, the kind of, the DSM, that's the yardstick which is used for assessing the illnesses. It also talks about the common mental disorders and the severe mental disorders, and you have a whole range in between. What is generally seen as, so we use this word very loosely, is mentally ill, or but is a mental. Words which are absolutely meaningless, which again carried, as you said, shame and
stigma.
A stigma with it. But when you look at some of these issues, they are mental health issues, yes, but they are not necessarily those which need to go into the biomedical model.
Yes.
Because the moment,
you've explained it better than me, the biomedical model. Yeah, you've explained it better.
In most cases, what happens is it starts with the biomedical and ends with the biomedical. So all the kind of advantages which counseling can do, or which psychologists can help out with, or a social worker can work with by making home visits and finding out how can you try and identify the issues which are precipitating all of this. With none of those kind of support systems or support systems in the house, it would have been a lot more difficult, and it would then be easier to isolate or make that person more dysfunctional. Today, when you talk about tools, when you talk about coaching, you talk about processes like this, a lot of focus is on being aware of the self, being able to understand. So to see from where am I coming that is creating a problem for me in my own environment. That level of self-awareness, that level of understanding. And fortunately, corporates are becoming aware of a lot of this. And there is a paradigm shift from mental illness to mental wellness.
Yes.
And I think that makes all the difference in being able to categorize or understand where that person is coming from and what needs to be done to help them to understand themselves.
Absolutely. I like the word, I like the thing that you said, that there's been a paradigm shift from illness to wellness, because I think Alexander also said even having the word disorder as part of a diagnosis automatically attaches shame and stigma to the individual. So we also have to be very careful about how we use our words. And a question just came to mind. Sorry, it's just come up for me, so I have to ask it. As coaches here, I know that not all coaches are trained in the mental health space, but still, as a coach, we are taught to hold space for our clients. We're taught to have something called unconditional positive regard, which is nothing else but having, a very altruistic kind of compassion for them and accepting them for who they are, what they are in that moment, allowing them to be vulnerable, and more importantly, holding space for them without judgment. So is there anything that you can speak? And I know that you are also a coach. So is there anything that we as coaches can do if we are not trained in the mental health space, if we don't have any kind of degree or training, just if we have the ICF coaching credential or any coaching credential, how can we understand what our client is going through, and how can we probably point them in the right direction to seek help if they need the help in the mental health space?
You just summed it up in that last sentence, because my recommendation or my suggestion would be, please refer the case.
Fantastic.
It can be to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, because when we use some of our coaching tools, we may be stirring up an honest nest, or we may be bringing back memories. If you take the case of, let's say, child sexual abuse, the person is already going through a trauma. You're making them relive that trauma, but you don't know how to handle it once that has started. Yes. So once you know that, with the coachee's permission or with the coachee's consent, maybe that's where the coaching skills would come in, to be able to explain to them as to why they need professional help. And again, the question of, there is no shame in what has happened to them. It's a perpetrator who should be ashamed, and that kind of reasoning, but reasoning may not work. But whatever is the end result, what is important would be the understanding that this is not the end of the road. And I still accept you unconditionally. I accept you for whatever, regardless of what you've been through. But here you need help, which I cannot give you at this point in time. If you have to be upfront about it, and you have to be able to confess that I'm out of depth.
Yes, absolutely. I think honesty is the best policy here, and doing what's best for the client. I mean, I think Priya said it really well, that you have to have unconditional positive regard. Priya Ramesh, who you know.
Yes.
You have to have unconditional positive regard would be a starting point, but referral to appropriate professional might be the best we can do as coaches. So I think both of you are on the same page for that. Vinita says not all of us can hold space, and as coaches, we need to be transparent enough. if the client's trauma is activating ours and making us not stay, we are not the right person to coach. She has a point. It's a very valid point.
It's not just in this case, but also in some other areas. It's highly possible that the coach himself or herself does relive certain experiences.
Yeah.
So can they get themselves checked out first or treated first, and then
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
I think in all these cases, what you're talking about is a basic fundamental foundation of honesty and the client or the coachee's interest in that.
So being client-centric and being honest and being authentic as a coach.
Being authentic.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mrs. Menon. So, your previous engagements have included transactional and transformational people practices, talent sourcing, acquisition, performance and management, organizational behavior, training and development, research, consulting. I think I should stop now.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to get at is you understand people. So what makes people tick and what causes them friction?
So asking a question is not just existential, but I think what our Munis and the Vedas are talking about.
Well, I mean, we all have this existential crisis at some point in our lives, right? So
Yes.
who best to ask you?
I wish I had the answer to that, but I know what makes me tick. So
Okay.
basically, I think to really look at it, people are very similar at the core. What do you work for? You work for happiness. You work for security. You work for success, reward, recognition. You want validation, right? You don't wake up in the morning saying, today I'm going to go out there and be nasty to 5 people. You are planning as to how you can make it more peaceful, maybe get along with your team, maybe the team member who's sticking out like a sore thumb, how can I address these issues? So HR's expertise comes in being able to identify which are these motivational points for the individual, and for the individual also to become more aware. So it can be various tools. And I think half the population here is right now also in the process of acquiring some of those tools of coaching. Very powerful tool in being able to help. But it's not the only tool in the bag. So you may have a lot of other tools which you can use. But the point is the basic thread which runs through is the happiness. And today countries are talking about happiness index.
Yeah, happiness.
And when you talk about even positive psychology, it does talk about the happiness index. Of course, the Buddhist philosophy says happiness, but it's at a different level. But the question is, what am I going to be looking for? So what makes me tick is what is my motivation, and what makes me, what creates friction, maybe a clash of values, clash of goals, clash of systems and functioning. It's possible. I mean, I have a certain aspiration and a goal, which is very different from what the organization has for me. Can I sort it out? Which is what the coach does to help them to do that as well. I mean, if you're looking at where am I today, where do I want to be, and how do I get there? It's extremely oversimplified form. So what can be done to understand from where people are coming from and see whether that fits in with what is available for them to be working on? In the sense, I mean, I'm looking at goals. If my goals don't match the company's plans, then I need to have a rethink. But at the end of the day, it is the happiness, the security, your family. You know, I had this boss, one of the most wonderful people I've ever worked with in my life. If anybody asked him, whom do you work for? He said, for my family. I work with ABC, I work for my family. His priority was very different. And I think it was a very positive response. So friction points, again, sometimes could be because of unhealthy competition instead of cooperation, where people are fighting, so busy fighting within themselves, with each other in the team, they don't need an outsider to come and break them up. They're only doing a successful job themselves. So can the HR be sensitive to some of these? Can we use tools where necessary? Equip the people concerned to be able to handle this and be able to handle differences without a total breakdown. But the skill necessary for that is what the host of team leads or HR or senior management, as you call, they would require, but it then also needs to trickle down the line, because the friction points start from there. But I'm still convinced that basically people are very similar. So
got it. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, people are very similar in the case of when you say that, you know, what drives people. I mean, it's definitely, happiness is definitely a huge thing, because otherwise people wouldn't be measuring on the happiness index. It wouldn't matter, you know, and it wouldn't matter to anybody if happiness wasn't a huge driving force. But like you said, it also matters, what are your values, what are your beliefs?
Yeah.
And I think if there's more alignment, I mean, I'm asking you, I'm not telling you, I'm not saying something, I'm not making a statement, I'm asking. I think if the powers that be, whether it's L&D or HR or even team leads or whoever the powers that be who make these decisions, would understand human psychology a little bit in terms of what can a coach do? How can a coach help? Because obviously it's not working. So how can the coach help in this particular situation? More from an intrinsic will and, well-meaning to help the individual, because healthy individuals will contribute to a team or contribute to the agenda or the end game of a corporate. A bunch of sick individuals, and when I say sick, I'm not saying sick, I'm saying, if they're not happy, if they're not motivated, if they cannot meet their goals, or XYZ, unhealthy competition, whatever you just mentioned and more, if that is going to be, being experienced, because, we are all energetic beings, right? So if I'm feeling a certain way, I'm definitely going to give it to you like a common cold, whether you like it or not, because it's going to rub off. And so I'm just wondering whether we need to start looking at this from a very different lens. What do you think about that?
we need to start working with HR, if that's what you mean.
Yes. Yeah, that's the bottom line. That's what I was
putting it very bluntly.
That's what I was hoping that you would say. We need to start. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is imperative that they are the ones who are empathetic enough to be able to understand where the employee is coming from. And if that doesn't happen, any amount of wellness programs that you have, or life skills programs, or anything that you have, really wouldn't get the same effect.
Yeah.
That you use.
Yeah.
You won't get the same effect, because you need to be able to get the right carpenter for that.
Absolutely. You need to have the right toolkit and the right carpenter. You're right.
So if the carpenter has a hammer and everything that's seen as a nail, then that would be disastrous for the organization and for the employees. So I think we need to start with empathy and a lot of the skills required there to to be able to really get the best out of the tools that your tool bag that you're carrying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The coach is carrying.
Yeah, that the coach is carrying. Thank you. Mrs. Menon, you're on the board of trustees for various NGOs that work in the areas of women and children, education, livelihood, rural development, and watershed management, and access to finance in rural India. What has been the main reason that has driven you to work in the non-profit sector?
If you notice, there is, again, a common thread in all of these. My inclination has been to work with those who are vulnerable, who have been less fortunate in many things. Whether, so a lot of the NGOs that I've been associated with or I have been helping out, they deal with women and children, and even the education has been for in tribal schools with the most marginalized. And again, with the watershed management, and was with a group of IIT alumni, the NRI alumni, where we worked on a village trying to ensure that water supply was available in those places, because what they needed was basic drinking water. And that was a few years ago when Tamil Nadu was recovering from its almost 4 years of drought. So the vulnerable. And the other philosophy which I have followed, when I've had a degree in social work, but then I went on to corporates, and it took me 25 years to come back. So the heart has been there for a long, long time. But it was a question of implementation for various reasons. And when I had to take up this, I thought, let me start working with people who, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, there are amazing people out there doing amazing things. It's not my job to tell them what to do. They already know it and they're doing it. So how can I support with whatever little expertise I have or little knowledge I have? How can I support them? So in all these cases, I have worked through other NGOs. I have worked with other groups which are already working in that field or which are continuing to work in that field. So even with the Banyan, it was to, or with the PALM, it was to be able to create programs which would create the manpower required for the sector. Because I believe that they can go out there and do a good job of it, because they already are doing a good, fantastic job. And this happens across all the NGOs, or most of the NGOs. It's mind-boggling, the kind of work that they're doing under the most difficult circumstances. So how can I support them is what has been the driving force for me.
And where does that come from?
I come from a very middle-class family. My father was in the railways, and we had we stayed in the colony, and my house just always had people living. Because in the 50s, we were here in the 50s, and the economy was opening up after the country's independence. There were hordes of relatives, friends of relatives, relatives of friends, friends, and all of whom were either looking for a job, looking for a career, looking for higher studies, looking for something. And I have never heard my parents say no. So they would always do whatever was possible within their means. I developed some very strong values from the home environment. Mother was a homemaker, but with a lot of other interests, including art, dance, music, organizing programs. She was a member of the Women's Indian Association way back in the 60s, which is still continuing today. Used to visit the Cancer Society to spend time with the cancer patients and their families. Used to visit the railway hospital, was on their committee. So I had role models at home. Well, it was compassion. Education was very big for them because they didn't get the amount of education they would like to have had, well, for all reasons. And I'm from a clan which was matriarchal and matrilineal. So I come from a strain of very, very strong women.
And we can see that in you.
Thank you. Although that was legal, the laws were changed and became a different patriarchal system way back in the early 20th century, I think somewhere around 1900, 1925 or so. But yes, I mean, 130, 40 years ago, my grandmother was a career woman. She retired as the headmistress of a school.
Wow.
My aunt was working, my mother's sister. She came to what was then Madras, today Chennai, and took a room and stayed because her job brought her here. I mean, it was unheard of in the 40s. But there were inspirations, there were role models right there. My mother was, like I said, my parents were interested in education. They have a trust in my parents' name. So we try to support. I try and do what I can to give back, because we've been blessed in many, many ways. And that's right there. Like I said, inspiration is there, and since we've been fortunate, we still have friends who are I don't know if my friends are on this, but friends who've been together from school the last 65 years.
Wow.
And my batchmates from my first job, we're still on a WhatsApp group and we are in touch. So we're so blessed in so many ways. When you look at the social capital that we have,
yeah,
which a lot of persons with mental illness don't have.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think
I like the word you used. I like the word you used, social capital.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, social
it's
capital.
Very important. We have very high social capital, but they don't.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you for, opening up and sharing so much of your wonderful family and the great matriarchs of your family and how it's passed down from generation. And I can see that there's a great sense of sharing, compassion, and paying it forward in the way you speak with a lot of passion, and you really believe in what you do. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for sharing that with us. I just have two more questions for you. You've conducted a lot of workshops for all levels of students. You've conducted workshops for CEOs to understand the self. And I think this is such an important thing today because there's so much information out there. There are so many so-called gurus, in the personal development space or in any space, including our own coaching space. Could you share with us some unconscious biases that each of us has towards understanding ourselves as a witness to what we're experiencing? And could this witnessing help us in improving our emotional and mental landscape?
I mentioned this earlier, but when we talk about having values, I do hold some beliefs and some values very dear to my heart. And if I had somebody there who was what I believe was their value or their belief system was different from mine, would that bring in a bias? Would, for instance, I believe in really hard work or in women using or making the best of their potential, even if it means personal discomfort or getting out of their space of their comfort zones, or being able to, or there being a disruption in the family. Because I have done that, but then been there, done that, would that bias me against it? Against if somebody chooses that they don't want to do this, can I then stand back and look at their value and help them to gain their potential with their values, not mine? Am I making sense? Or
Yes.
Because if I believe that this is how it should be, then it's very difficult. I'm not going to be dispassionate about it. I'm not going to be, or rather dispassionate about it, or nor am I going to be unbiased about it. If I could do it, you can, and that kind of work. But that may work in some cases to be able to encourage a person to say, look, if I can do it, I'm sure you can. But not in something like this. And if you told me I'm biased, then I would be quite shocked and say, who, me, biased? No way. But somewhere along, some of the beliefs that people hold about gender, about efficiency of women, I've had colleagues go in for interviews. I've overheard them say, like, let's not select women because they'll go on maternity leave. But on the face of it, oh yes, equal opportunities for everybody. So they've not been prepared to be as witnesses, stand aside and look at it. So that self-awareness programs that we do aim at some of these, but if that can happen, I would say it's very successful. Even if I am made aware that there is something which I need to look at further, I think that is a step forward. That is definitely a learning, because changing habits is not easy.
Yeah.
And changing mindsets and changing those which are at the subconscious level, the unconscious level, is a lot more difficult. How can we help a person? Before we help that person, how can we help ourselves?
Yes. So you're saying that the first step to understanding our mental and emotional landscape as a witness in an objective manner, the first thing that you would say would be to check ourselves objectively through awareness?
Yes.
Okay.
Look at some of my biases, which I've never thought of as a bias, which I've thought of as a value. I mean, if I believe that all youngsters should be ambitious, and somebody says, oh, I don't want to transfer, I don't want to move. Yeah. And my antennas go up saying, what's wrong with you?
Exactly. So accepting yourself as a unique person in that you are different, they are different, and not kind of foistering our opinion or our values or our beliefs or our way of thinking on somebody else just because we did it doesn't mean they have to do it.
Yes. Can I then step back at that point and I be witness to it and say, okay, you plan, what would you like to be, where would you like to be within your dreams and goals and ambitions?
Okay.
How do you want to take this further?
Yeah. I think, there's a coach, Vinita, who's saying that, is this not unconditional positive regard? I think it is.
It is in a way.
In a way, yes, it is in a way.
It's unconditional to the extent that otherwise I was putting the preconditions.
Exactly, yeah.
So if I can make it unconditional, then it's beneficial to me as a coach as well.
Absolutely. It clears your space also, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I mean, it's like a double whammy for both, for the coach and the client.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mrs. Menon, you've also worked extensively with children. Can you tell us briefly about the work that BAM has done in the mental health space with children and how that can be a catalyst to the all-round development of young adults? And I'll tell you from where I'm asking, the perspective from where I'm asking this question. The new epidemic, according to the latest research that Harvard conducted, I think about 6 months ago, says that loneliness is the new pandemic. They're not even talking about unhappiness or happiness. They're saying loneliness. More people are succumbing to suicide because they're lonely. And as social media grows, people are becoming lonelier and lonelier. So, when we think of mental health, loneliness is definitely a mental health issue. I mean, at least that's what I believe. And this research paper that was done in Harvard says so. And you've worked so much with children, especially with BAM. So can you just give us a brief history as to what kind of work they do and how can this be a catalyst for young adults?
when we first started, when BAMU started, it wasn't started with the intention of working with children. It was looking more at creating the human resources necessary for the mental health sector, which included whether it was at the master's level or the diploma level. We created these programs. If Banyan had to do an upscaling, then what kind of resources were necessary for that, and how do we equip those resources to be able to perform better or perform their tasks and roles. So when we started working with, first it was with the children of the clients, and there were much smaller groups who were facing difficulties, not just with cultural adjustments or those around them, but with the fact that they also had to play the role of a caregiver. And that during their very difficult childhood years themselves. So, and this just happens, it must be happening in other homes where, especially where the mother has a mental illness. But so we started working with them to help them to adjust, to help them to, then went on to what we call it was called tuition centers, but they were basically after school. And that was then opened up to the community as well.
Okay.
I think that many of these students in and around the Kovalam area where we were working were first generation learners, or they were not people who had much support where the education system was concerned. So this helped them to be able to cope with their classwork, so that then they don't lose interest and drop out. And on the other hand, we also had clients who were good in, or who were teachers, or who had recovered, who would definitely do an exceptionally good job of the teaching. So we had people who, we had a resource available and we had a need for it. So that's how work with this group started. And then Dr. Lakshmi Ravikant and some of the others then started a summer program with them, because during summer when they had more time. So with this group, we started working on specific aspects of the issues that they faced, including things like resilience. How do they cope with bullying? How do they cope with love affairs? Those areas, which subsequently, thanks to Dr. Kishore, the director of Banyan, and he had created this life skills module along with his colleague, Dr. Shashikala, from this was in Nimhans.
Nimhans, okay.
Then he started rolling out these programs, and that was not restricted to children. It was for teachers, it was for mental health professionals, it was for college students, and, school students, and whoever. The idea was to be able to give them an armory which they could carry with them, and which they could then, utilize as and when and how required. So it was important that they are able to wrap their heads around a lot of things which are happening around them, which initially they had no idea how to cope with. And interestingly, I'll just read out the life skills program that is now being offered to these. It talks about creative thinking. It talks about problem solving, interpersonal communications, effective communication, coping with emotions, coping with stress, self-awareness, empathy, critical thinking, decision making. Isn't this the whole repertoire that the coach carries?
Absolutely. And isn't it so relevant to young adults?
Absolutely, exactly. So when they go out there, then things are not absolutely overwhelming anymore.
So you're providing them with, like you said, you're providing them with an armory or a toolkit of things that they can pick out depending upon the challenge that they are facing. And so they're equipped to kind of, and also I think what's coming up for me, Mrs. Menon, is it builds up trust in young people. Yes. They learn to trust themselves more. So even if they are, feeling lonely or feeling a certain way, they know that they have their back, or they can be confident enough to reach out to a coach or a mentor or a mental health professional and be vulnerable and say to them, I can't cope with this, or please help me. Because I think also young people nowadays, I'm an avid podcast listener. So I listen to a lot of people in the mental health space helping young people. And a lot of times what I'm hearing people say is that young people are very, very intelligent. They want to do everything. They can do this, they can do that. They can, they're very creative and they're very intelligent, but they still do not know how to ask for help, because asking for help is still seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're equipping them is also confidence to step up and say, I'm confident enough to ask for help, but I'm not so confident to handle this on my own. So that wisdom comes in where they probably ask.
Yes. And also they make great peer leaders.
Exactly, peer leaders. That's so important.
Absolutely. The Banyan has had some amazing peer leaders in terms of both the those who have recovered from the illness, youngsters like this, or in fact, some of these children of clients have done so well. One of them had done her social work. She's joined as a social worker and recently got married. Somebody else, one of the children has become a photographer. So careers which they would have aspired to, but not known how to go about it maybe earlier.
Yes.
And when you look at things like coping and coping with stress, it ensures that they don't indulge in the dysfunctional coping mechanisms.
Dysfunctional coping mechanisms, exactly, like addiction,
abuse, or
exactly,
a whole lot of other things, because they don't know how to cope. As you said, I don't know whom do I turn to, whom do I ask?
Yes. And there's a very nice comment coming in from Preeti, who says the hustle culture is adding up to it. Absolutely. People wanting to hustle side jobs and wanting to burn the candle at both ends, when at the end of the day, it's not worth it. So I think that's something also that you can help them with. What are your priorities, or what's most important?
Yeah. In fact, I had met this smart young lady who'd been working in a very large IT company and earning a very good package for over 10 years. She was working there, and then one fine day she decided to ask herself this question and said, "What am I doing here? Why am I doing this?" And then says, "I discovered that I definitely didn't want to answer to a dashboard and 10,000 people whose faces I don't even see." So she decided to move from there, and now she does event management for weddings and makes gifts for weddings.
Wow.
And she says, I'm so happy doing what I'm doing. So
absolutely, I think
people can reach that level of maybe being able to quit everything, but so they hustle for all kinds of other things. But and just one more addition, you were talking about the loneliness.
Loneliness.
UK that has a Ministry of Loneliness, right?
Yeah.
So, and the Minister for Loneliness.
Exactly.
So, if it needs to go to a ministerial level to solve a problem, which should be done at the community level.
I mean, yeah, when you think about it, it's kind of mind-boggling, right? I mean,
absolutely.
They should be grassroots level things. Yeah. Mrs. Menon, we don't have much time left. So it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and you've given us so much in terms of your heart, your passion, your experience, and so much more. I have one final question for you. What I'm noticing with all the diverse things that you've done in the last decades of your, illustrious life, I see an element of giving back. I see an element of service and genuine compassion. And this is what draws you to these worthy causes. I'm just wanting to ask you one final question. How would you describe a hero?
I think that would be the easiest of all the questions. Not an Amitabh Bachchan, not a Madhavan. I'm horrible at this. I don't know who I'm not much of a film buff. Whoever, not any of them. To me, it is that client, a Banyan client, who has been picked up, from the street, homeless, battered, with all kinds of atrocities perpetuated, who gets rescued, is brought into treatment, gets treated, and then chooses to go back to that family because that's where she thinks she belongs.
Wow.
Or we have a famous story. How many minutes do we have?
We've passed our time by 7 minutes, but you can tell us the story and
No,
we'll
just a quick few sentences. Sure. We have two peer leaders that we were talking about, but when they started, there were two young girls in a small little village in Goandikurchi near Trichy, who lived a very happy life till suddenly then life took a turn, and then every imaginable curveball was thrown at them. And they lost the mother, then they lost the father, then one got married, she lost her husband. The other got married, she lost both of them. She lost her husband and her child. So they both, the first elder sister they developed signs of mental illness along with postpartum depression. And the villagers kind of locked her up and they threw stones at her. But she used to take her clothes off and walk in the streets. She didn't know what she was doing. And so subsequently, she took whatever 300 rupees that she had and came to Madras, came to Chennai. And was homeless here because she didn't know anyone here. She had forgotten her and the only address that she knew. And finally, she was rescued by the valley. Suffice it to say that she was treated, she went back to see her sister and then told her that there is a place like this. And during that time, the sister had also couldn't handle a lot of this grief. She started falling ill. She showed signs of illness. And she knew that the only way she could save herself was if she came into this place. So she again boarded a train, came to Chennai, and was brought into the Banyan. Today, these two sisters, one is qualified as an auxiliary nurse.
Wow.
The other is an amazing person who takes care of all the home again projects and housekeeping. And they are independently operating from Trichy. It's running homes because they felt they had to go back and give back to the society, to women like them who needed help. And they had, the nurse had started like a small health center of her own. So the very same people who threw stones at her now bring their children to her for treatment. And that is the kind of story which keeps organizations and NGOs going. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, and that's so fitting for our ending because the webinar is called Hero's Journey, and when I think of these two women, they have had a hero's journey. It's like almost like coming full circle, and thanks to people like you who've cared for them, mentored them, helped them, and given them resources. So on behalf of Kocharya, on behalf of all our wonderful audience, our global audience, on behalf of Kiva and myself, I'm going to thank you, Mrs. Menon. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. And thank you to everybody for sticking with us for these last 10 minutes because we've gone a little bit over time. But I think it was worth it. So thank you, everybody. And from my side, good night. And I'm handing it back to Kiva.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Avril. Thank you so much, Mrs. Menon. This was extremely inspiring and we're leaving with so many takeaways and so much to learn from you and your journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Menon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kiva. Lots of love and lots of metta to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Avril. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you next Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.